Thanks for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Galvin-Smith. Tonight, hope is all but lost for 8 miners trapped in a flooded mine in Burkina Faso for a month. There's doubts that they've survived. Efforts to get to them have been non-stop, but rescuers finally reach a stopped survival chamber hundreds of meters underground and say that none of the missing men are there. Also, suspects are arrested in Mali after authorities say that they foiled a coup attempt earlier this month. The army says that the move against the ruling junta was sponsored by an unnamed Western state. And tough but fair, advocates calling the tax reform on the continent say that lawmakers should be on the sharp end of pushing for changes that will tackle an unequal system that hampers development, puts more burden on the poor, and sees big businesses not paying an equitable share. But first, none of the 8 missing Burkina Faso miners who've been gone since April 16th have made it to an underground rescue chamber. Rescue workers had held out a faint hope that some of the men may have survived the flooding of a zinc mine a month ago. But emergency teams finally made it to the refuge room 570 meters below ground, and they say that there's no one there. Federica Bail tells us more.
In a tragic update after a month-long operation, emergency workers found no survivors deep inside the flooded Perkoa zinc mine in Burkina Faso, its government said Tuesday.
They opened the refuge chamber for us. Despite all our incantations and prayers, we found the room empty with not a soul inside. It's a cruel piece of information we must bear, that we've passed on to the victims' parents.
On April 16th, torrential downpour caused severe flooding in the mine galleries, leading to hopes that the 8 missing miners inside would be able to find their way to the refuge room, 570 meters below ground, that was equipped with food and water. Both Trevali Mining Corps, the Canada-based company behind the Perkoa mine, and the government have launched probes into the causes of the incident. Although last week an official said that the sudden heavy rains during Burkina Faso's normally dry season caught them off guard.
Given the dry season, obviously we do not expect rain, and we had an absolute torrential downpour that was never seen probably for the last 200 or 300 years in Burkina Faso. It's not only us that have been affected, it's also the communities around us that are affected by completely unexpected rain.
The Perkoa mines are made up of open pits with underground galleries and shafts. Trevali have said that mining and milling operations at Perkoa will remain suspended for the foreseeable future.
Well, Malian authorities have arrested suspects after the country's ruling junta said that it had foiled an attempted coup, which allegedly took place on the night of May 11th and into the early hours of the 12th. The army claims that a group of officers tried to seize power with the backing of an unnamed Western government. Sam Bradpeace tells us more.
Much of this story is completely baffling. For a start, the communiqué was released a full 5 days after this alleged attempted coup d'etat took place. On top of this, there's a claim of foreign Western involvement, the underlying message here being that France was involved, although France was not mentioned at all directly in the communiqué, and there's no evidence whatsoever to support this claim at this moment in time. Now, analysts I spoke to remain largely in the dark about what actually happened, but there are 2 key hypotheses which are being floated. The first is that the Malian government, the junta, which itself took power in a coup d'etat in 2020, is becoming increasingly unpopular as it grapples with an Islamist insurgency and tough economic sanctions. Now, in this scenario, it's possible that no attempted coup d'etat took place whatsoever, and that instead the junta is pointing the finger at foreign powers as a way to distract the people from the very real problems that the country is facing. The second hypothesis, in which it is possible that an attempted coup d'etat took place and which remains valid, is that there are different groups within the ruling junta which are all vying for power, and that a group of ambitious officers perhaps did indeed try to seize power. The problem with Mali at the moment is that getting reliable information out of the country is very difficult. Now, the junta itself says that an investigation into what really happened has been launched, and that those responsible for planning and attempting to carry out a coup d'etat will be brought to justice.
Well, Sam Bradpeace, our regional correspondent there for us. Now, 4 members of Nigeria's cabinet have said that they will not be running in next year's elections after all. President Muhammadu Buhari had given all would-be candidates who are members of the government a choice between keeping their current jobs or throwing their hats into the ring for the top job. 10 cabinet members have reportedly resigned in order to stand in ruling party primaries, which will decide who will represent the APC in the presidential race. Meanwhile, the central bank governor is seeking a court injunction to stop the Electoral Commission preventing him from running without resigning his post. Well, few people like paying taxes, but they are key to raising resources for social and economic development. On the whole, Africa's not great at taxing corporate income, and imbalances often see poorer people with a bigger tax burden than the rich. Tax justice advocates are pushing for changes to make systems fairer and more transparent. They want multinationals and digitalized business giants to pay their share and for tax to be a tool that tackles inequality across Africa rather than drives it. Earlier, I spoke to Dennis Ogunzu, a Ugandan MP that's working with the Pan-African Tax Justice Network to push openly for more tax reform.
Tax justice is important because countries must be able to mobilize domestic resources to deliver services to their people. And many African countries grapple with this challenge. They can't be able to deliver the most basic care. They cannot finance health expenditure. They cannot build roads. They cannot lift out their people out of poverty. So having tax reforms, a tax system that works for the people is very, very important if governments are to deliver on the obligations.
And how do you think Africa's tax system needs to change?
First, the African tax system must emphasize bringing benefits to the people. Right now, most of the tax system tends to favor multinationals. You will find the exemptions accorded to big companies on corporation tax. For example, in Uganda, you have a power generation company which makes billions of profits, but they're exempted from paying corporation tax. That is very, very unfair when the poor are, bearing the burden of very harmful tax. So it's very, very important that the citizens should be able to reap benefits from any economic or value generated from their country, and that can help them appreciate the importance of taxation. Right now, many poor people do not appreciate why they should actually pay tax.
Have you personally been doing to try and push change in Uganda's tax system?
Yes, we've been making efforts to ensure the tax system addresses some of the inequalities in our country. We want a tax system that can work for the people. As I said, not for multinationals only. And that requires coming up with the policies, that requires the reforms, that requires challenging the establishment. Because we got to realize that many of the tax systems actually thrive in corrupt regimes. So it's very, very important that the laws are reformed, the population is educated on their rights and obligations, and the multinationals are also put to task to explain their roles in promoting inefficient tax systems that burden the poor. So as a parliament, we've been trying to ensure that the Uganda government embraces tax policies that are fair enough, that remove unnecessary burden on the poor, but also we should be able to generate adequate resources to be able to deliver the most basic services. Right now, our country, as it's in elsewhere in other African countries, suffers the burden of debt, there's excessive borrowing, and that largely happens because we are unable to mobilize enough resources. And the parliament passed a law recently, and this deals with the oil industry. And you find there are a lot of exemptions that the multinationals will benefit from. And that's not quite fair. It promotes inequality and injustice. So every other day we try to advocate for a fair system.
Ugandan MP, the Honourable Dennis Oguzu there, speaking to me a little earlier on. Now, Ivory Coast is the world's leading producer of cashew nuts, but hopes to level up to become a big added value player and start processing the nuts for international markets itself. But that is easier said than done, with the country facing stiff competition from other nations with more established industries. France 24's team tells us more.
It's an extremely delicate job, picking out the most pristine cashew nuts ready to be exported to the rest of the world.
This is Ivory Coast's brown gold. These cashew kernels will be exported. This is what you find in nut mixes, in restaurants, in your homes.
Ivory Coast is the #1 cashew producer in the world, but 80% of its nuts are shelled outside of the country, most commonly in Asia.
These are raw nuts.
It is those raw nuts that this company has been transforming locally, an ambitious project that is also littered with challenges: unskilled labor, expensive machinery, and supply shortages, which makes it difficult to compete with Asian players. For now, the 30 or so factories operating in Ivory Coast are not yet profitable. But for this factory manager, local processing is worth the effort.
The goal is to be able to produce but also transform here so that the added value remains here.
Added value that is far from negligible. When you buy cashew nuts at a supermarket, the farmer gets 4% of the profit, while the factory gets 80%. Companies specializing in export have also been paying attention to the Ivorian cashew industry. This firm, which supplies the American market, has increased its purchases of locally processed.
It's in our best interest for this market to grow, because now people care about quality and where the food comes from. And the Ivory Coast origin is good because transportation times are reduced.
To help companies produce locally, the government has pledged 20% of their total raw material needs at a fixed rate, a limited but welcome measure for cashew industry professionals.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Till then, take care. Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith.
All the latest in politics, economics and the arts in Africa on France 24. Our journalists are in every region, every country, to report on the emergence of a continent of unparalleled riches, bringing you Africa's stories on France 24.
Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.